Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you're able to pick up this episode of In Conversation With. My name's Dave Sleet and I am co-founder of APA, and today I'm going to be joined by APA's CEO, Siobhan Crosby, and the winner of last year's Adrian Pennington Legacy Award. Now, the Adrian Pennington Legacy Award is awarded by APA exclusively for students who demonstrate the best examples of empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard towards not only their study environment, but also the mental health arena that they are looking to move into. Ros Graham was that winner in 2022, and she holds that for the reasons that we will demonstrate in this conversation. It's worth pointing out that also both Ros and Siobhan are hearing, I won't say impaired, but they both wear hearing aids, and therefore this conversation may have those factors play out. So I'm letting you know in advance. But for now, please welcome both Siobhan Crosby and Ros Graham. Ladies, how are you?
Well, I'm very well, thank you. I'll come to Ros in a second. I'd just like to give a tiny little background information as to why the Adrian Pennington Award. Adrian Pennington was my personal supervisor every single week for approximately 14 years, from the time that I was actually studying right the way through. Unfortunately, he is no longer with us. Unfortunately, he did die from cancer a few years ago. I think it was about 4 now. But I can honestly say Adrian taught me so much about what I didn't learn through my studying, and guided me, nurtured me, taught me and supported me throughout every single week's worth of working with clients. And his proficiency and his knowledge got passed down to me, and a promise that I made to him, as I was honoured to be invited to go and see him the day before that he actually died. My promise to him was that I would ripple his knowledge down the ages and hold on to everything that he ever gave to me, because what he's given to me helped me create a thriving practice, made me a much more efficient and proficient therapist than I would have ever been without that man by my side. So this is a real honour and a very personal attribute and award to give to somebody else that I see the qualities in them that he saw in me. So it is a very personal award. It does represent an extortionate amount of appreciation for the vocation that we're in. And Ros, I was very proud to have you nominated for that award and win that award last year. And while we're here, what was it like for you as a trainee, almost on the verge of knowing where her next step is going? What was it like for you to receive that reward?
Hello, everyone. Astonishing, actually. As we went through the awards, I sort of realised that I was at the end, and slowly it dawned on me that I was at the end for a reason. So the whole of the award session, which was obviously excellent and brilliant people there, was just really sort of thinking, what on earth is this? I didn't really understand what it was. So hearing you now and remembering then, I feel honoured, and I guess also privileged and excited about what's to come. And you know, you don't always see the good things in yourself, although we do try and look into that in our training. So to have somebody else recognize it, I guess, is quite wonderful. Thank you.
And Ros, the entire process of taking the step to become a trainee and go through that trainee experience, and we'll talk about that in a bit more detail. But you're now on the cusp of qualifying. How do you feel moving into that world with everything that you've been through, and obviously the recognition for the way in which you've embraced the vocation?
A myriad of feelings, but I guess, to be frank, a relief, because there's a lot of pressure towards the end of the diploma, and I work part-time as well. So fitting that all in was extremely stressful, emotional. So I guess right now, relief, excitement is like the lull before the storm, hopefully many clients to come. Yeah, I think keen to get on, as Bonnie touched on before. You know, you learn so much in your studies, but I think really, like with a lot of things, the real learning comes from clients and experiences that you have once you are qualified.
And you know, Adrian was, as Vonnie mentioned, was there alongside her in that supervisory role and really defined a lot of what supervision means. But for you, what does supervision mean for you?
Very good question. So presently I have two supervisors, a private supervisor and a supervisor through my placement. What does supervision mean for me? It means learning, guidance, a kind of advice, because when you're a student, I guess that supervision is more about learning, whereas afterwards it different kind of nuance when you're qualified, from what I can understand. I'm often, for me personally, very grateful when I have clients where I'm not sure, I feel a bit strange after the session. I make my notes and I go to the supervisor. It kind of allays fears. It can allay fears. It helps me to help them, to help myself, and also to divide up in my own mind what I need to take perhaps to personal therapy if I have issues which need to be dealt with, so I can be more in the room with the client. I'm also a huge fan of mentoring, and one of the things perhaps that I've done, which I've noticed my peers have not, and there's no right or wrong, but personally I need it, is to ensure that I've got 2 or 3 mentors who are very experienced that I can kind of speak to when I want to and learn more. But I guess that's my nature.
And that kind of building a team around you as you kind of prepare for that step into the vocation is something that Vonnie's advocated, you know, countless times, I think, and most people will have heard her do that. Von, what do you think the kind of that cusp moment can be for someone who has done all of the training, and that kind of fear factor has to be kind of embraced a little bit, doesn't it?
Well,
Yes. Go on, Bonnie.
I can honestly say, and I guess it's a golden rule that I've lived by, having done a placement myself, being very aware of the people around me that I was training with at the time. The greatest thing that I discovered was the level of fear of responsibility, but the lack of arrogance that was attached to that fear for the responsibility of actually working with clients with their lives had to be there and visible and heard for me. We were all genuinely terrified of making a mistake, and that was a good thing. Fear can often be a really good indicator to reflect somebody's level of recognition of the responsibility that we hold as practitioners. And I did recognize throughout my career, and especially on the cusp of being the trainee to the qualified, I was genuinely scared. So hence the fact having supervision once a week Adrian used to work with me on containment. So he used to say, and I can laugh about it now, because I'd be so scared that if I laughed in an appointment in my placement and I laughed all the way through, I'm thinking of one appointment that I had, I'd be straight on the phone to him. Oh my God, I laughed all the way through the appointment. You know, was that a good thing? Was that a bad thing? I was full of curiosity and learning and wanting to make sure that I did literally the best that I could by the people in front of me. And I can honestly say, for me, as a trainee going into qualified, it is a scary experience because of the responsibility. It ought to feel that way. If it doesn't feel that way, I'd actually be a bit concerned. But one thing I will say is having that mentor, because it is important to understand as we grow and develop as practitioners, initially having that supervision support on a really regular basis is absolutely essential, not just for you, but for you, your clients, and if you're going into private practice, your business too. And if you people in the right way, having that guidance, mentoring, because albeit I am a supervisor, I come from a place of nurture, support, guidance, education, and a space to talk things through. If I know information that will help that practitioner working away and they don't know the piece of information that I know that can help them, I will educate them. Yeah. And I think that's part of what mentoring comes into supervision.
And this
but
is
the more we grow and develop, the less we need that mentoring side. But that takes time, and that takes the recognition that it does take time.
And this was part of Ros's kind of nomination, that awareness of building the team was fundamentally a component. And Ros, you've done that exceptionally well through training. You've built that team. Now on the cusp, how do you feel?
In regards to moving forward with business, or regard to supervision, or
both?
Yeah. So I was thinking about that before we had the conversation. I think that for me personally, I do have a fear every single time I sit in front of a new client. I do have that fear because I want to do my best in it to enable the client to help themselves. I think I'm quite not rare, but I have an unusual confidence from my background in sales and a little bit of acting. So I'm quite confident, but always have a fear at the pit of my stomach that can I do my best for this client? So I guess that's an element that Vonnie talked about there, which I hadn't thought about, which I think my supervisor is often quite pleased with, thinking about it. It's easy to contain, going back to containment and Adrian and what he said, but I guess that I'm learning to do that. I was also thinking that one of the things I've noticed with my peers, and it's been quite challenging for them, is I did quite a lot of voluntary work in befriending and with a bereavement agency before I started the course. And I have to say that has stood me in really good stead, because they had two different sides to the placement. So with contracting and finishing with the befriending clients and then starting a proper contracting in my placement, that was quite a thing that I think really helped me. And I would put it out there to anyone thinking about starting the journey, that might be a place to start.
Why would you say that was a good place to start, Ros?
Why? I think there are several reasons. For me personally, it was continuing something I've always done, which is a little bit of charity work and helping. So that helping element, did I want to develop it into counselling? Did I not? Did I enjoy it? Did I enjoy being in the room with people? And the answer for me for all those things was yes, I loved it. So I guess there was a kind of grounding as to, is this right for me? Is this right for me? I'm not sure. Yeah, I like it. Could it be a career? Let's look into it. So that was that side of it for me.
If I was to say that the mentoring wasn't as pressurizing to make sure everything was therapeutic in its background. Would you say, because I almost hear you talking like it was a stepping stone to understanding yourself, but without the pressure of knowing that you're not being in a therapeutic role at that point in time, but you are utilizing the skills that you're learning in your therapeutic role, but in a mentoring role instead. It almost sounds like a step into taking the full responsibility in a very professional way as an actual therapist. That's what I'm actually hearing.
So that's interesting, because at the time I hadn't really thought of it. I was I have another diploma and I was doing something else related. So I was thinking about it, but not really consciously. It was there in the background. In answer to your question, I can't answer it properly because actually our supervisor was fully qualified, and we had monthly. Now I'm thinking about it, we had monthly supervisions where we all did what you and I know we do in group supervision, and it was actually very professional. She did the Cartman triangle, so that's something. So there was some theory related back to us, although we didn't realise it at the time, but I knew I liked it. So I can't really divide it up because I wasn't consciously thinking of moving forward in this. I just knew I liked it. As for possibly the slightly lapsadaisical therapy stroke visiting, I guess there's now looking back on it, a divide there, and I do have some issues now with some of the things I may or may not have said without realizing could have been damaging or not. Revealing things about myself, for example, which I wouldn't do now. They wouldn't be necessary. It would benefit the client, might harm the client. So things like that. But it was a visiting service, so I don't have a lot of guilt there. I just am very conscious of the fact that it's very different.
And I think, as you were talking about that experience and that kind of those building blocks that, almost kind of laid the foundations for the path that you then chose to walk on. I mean, I think Carl would turn around and say you were creating the conditions for your growth. I mean, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that by building those experiences, you were able to make informed choices. You're building your own awareness, and as that learning has proceeded, you've been able to pull on that and really use that awareness and go, actually, if I'm going to do this now, I'm going to do this differently, and I'm going to use those skills to be able to identify when it's X, when it's Y, and when it's Z. And I think that stands any professional in good measure, because they've got the capacity to do that. And that self-awareness is phenomenal. And it's, it's one of the things that kind of just makes you stand out as a trainee and kind of moving into the vocation. But what's looking back, because it is now looking back, you've been through that educational pathway for good, bad, and indifferent. What do you take away from the experience of modern day education in the therapeutic arena?
How long have we got?
Now, you asked me before we started. I said to you, we can't go till Tuesday.
Maybe Wednesday then. How can I be polite? Isn't necessary. Varied, scary, harrowing, not as full of understanding as I thought it might be. Culturally, racially, diversity, everything that Ronnie and myself know should be there, sadly lacking in areas. I had the experience of several different colleges, because the college I started on, for everybody listening who's not familiar, in the path that I went down, which is a diploma, there are 4 different years which you go through. Level 2 is the start, the stepping stones, I think David would call them. Level 3 is theory, and the floor of the diploma years are challenging and mixed and involve a placement and 100 client hours, as well as going deeper into theory and having role plays and all sorts. So the first year was fun. The second year was challenging because of my hearing. I had a scribe, and I didn't know I could have a scribe. Once I had a scribe, it was great. Challenging, not terrible. And finally, I had 5 years, because I had a middle year where the public college didn't help me with coming out of COVID with my hearing issues at all. And it was, quite frankly, awful. A full refund from that particular college, and I actually was quite traumatized by it and through it. I had support from many people, so thank you also to you guys for that. And then finally, I found a small college. And when you go to a small college, just for your information, everyone, that doesn't turn over more than £500,000 per annum, you cannot get an adult learner loan. So I needed a small college for my hearing, and I'm also dyslexic, so it was very helpful to be in a nurturing small environment. But then I had to fully fund it. So that was challenging, as well as keeping a job, as well as going to night school.
Yeah.
But I think yeah, and I saw others also, in full-time employment, they really found it very hard, especially in London with the traffic. You're going from work to the college. It was really difficult. There's no bones about it. So now, in answer to your question, and what I said before, relief, and shock and disbelief at some of the lecturers and the environments in which they created.
And Von,
Thank you for that. If you could go back and give advice to any of the organisations that you didn't have the easiest time, what would be your advice to them, and how would it have impacted on you if they were to take the advice that you'd give them? How would that have changed things for you?
Well, I like most counsellors and therapists, I hope, I see that errors and mistakes and these things that happen, you can only grow from them. So I'm actually quite grateful that I had that, because that puts me in a position of, more knowledge and appreciation and empathy for those with additional learning needs and physical disabilities. Now that's good, but obviously, bluntly, the educational system through the state, I would be, and I have written to them when it all happened. The responses were not. So the refund was monetary, so that was one thing, but the response was not a sorry. The response is thank you for alerting us to this situation. So I guess right now, from where I'm sitting, I might have taken it further, but there's a certain amount of fear, to be frank, within our learning environment, whether it's counselling or not, that when we complain, there could be barriers and bars and closing in from institutions, which may make it very difficult for us to move forward. So I guess what I did at the time was right for me, but with the knowledge I have now, I ensure that any needs that I have are always met to the best of any environment to which I'm within. That makes sense.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And Von, we see students coming into the vocation and wanting to go through that learning to be able to provide the service. They don't have the knowledge before they start the course of how to define their needs and their the nuances that are going to allow their successful pathway. And education, I mean, we've seen the manipulation of students into, you must do this or you can't study. What do you think is the best kind of starting point for anyone looking at going into the education arena?
I would genuinely say, and I don't enjoy saying this because I don't actually agree with what I'm about to say, but I am also incredibly aware of power dynamics in the academic world. I would unfortunately say, play the game. Play the game till you get your qualification, to actually verbally acknowledge, because of the power dynamics in academics. If you are the kind of person that absolutely believes in standing up and saying and pointing out when things need to be changed, could be made easier, often, as Ros has pointed out, it becomes, one, you're often not accepted for that. Two, you're actually often dismissed for that. And thirdly, you're perceived in a very specific way. A lecturer can actually work with you, or a peer supervisor can actually work with you. I certainly remember my own training at it going amazingly well until, and this is where I had to really learn to contain, until I challenged my peer supervisor on what I heard in the room as discrimination. And on the basis of that, actually ended up having to complete another challenge turned into an accusation, which then resulted in me having to look for another peer supervisor. And the experience at the time was absolutely horrendous. I saw this peer supervisor once a month. I would leave that peer supervision with two others that were with me, and I would be crying my eyes out with absolute, utter shock, horror, disbelief, and fear of getting that far and not getting my qualification. And as it turned out, I got placed with another supervisor. That supervisor was absolutely wonderful, didn't see an issue in any way whatsoever, but it did mean that I ended up completing an extra 50 hours on top of the 100 hours, purely because I opened my mouth and said something. Now, for me personally, the whole ethos of therapy and being a therapist is being comfortable with assertiveness. But it's really important to appreciate that assertiveness sometimes means containing. Assertiveness sometimes means recognize your goal, recognize how to get there. And unfortunately, and I do, like I said, totally disagree with this, unfortunately, play the game until you've got your qualification.
Ros,
Absolutely.
And there you go. It is a case that in the modern age, education has become a business in its own right, and the programs will generate bums on seats. And while the learning is valuable, the support system has to step up and be even stronger. And that's a personal view, looking at the education system. But Ros, you've been through it.
Yeah.
And just in your responses to that kind of environment says that there is an awful lot of way for the education sector to go to actually match the ethical and principle of the very thing that they're teaching. Would that be fair?
Spot on, quite frankly. So just for the record, where I had the situation at the college with my hearing, afterwards, both those lecturers left. They were traumatized by it too. And this college no longer offers the course. That's quite interesting. Yeah, I think that a case in point, something very specific within level 4 is an example. I don't know if Bonnie can get this and whether she had it when she did her training, because obviously a lot before mine. Transcribing a session is where we might record a role play with a peer within the college before we go out of the college and get permission from real clients. And transcribing for me, with my hearing and understanding and dyslexia, and so with my partner's help, because it was a role play, so he was allowed to help me. It took 8 hours to transcribe a 50-minute session. I ended up in tears. So it's just those small things where the college said, oh yeah, you can have a couple of extra weeks. But actually, very specifically, I needed to implement something, a device that recorded infinitum every single word that the peer was saying. So these little things are not catered for at the moment. So for me, it's my hearing, but for somebody else, it might be something else. But it's also quite interesting to think about the fact that I'm getting a therapy dog, and within my college environment, they more or less said no. Whereas I was thinking, if I had been a blind person with a dog, would they have said no? It's this visual interpretation, because I cope well with my hearing loss. I speak well because I haven't been born deaf. It's a hearing loss that has occurred during my life. So all these perceptions of how you are, which in fact may not be correct at all. I see Bonnie nodding there. I don't know if you agree with me there, Bonnie.
I do. As you know, I also wear hearing aids. I didn't know at the time of my studying that I had a major problem with my hearing. That actually progressed over the next couple of years. And I find the whole training establishment really quite sad, because as David mentioned, the ethics that we are duty bound to follow are not often the ethical approach of academical worlds. Now, I've spoken to multitudes of academics over 21 years, and academics is absolutely relevant and important. Of course it is. But when I even come back to your own experience and what you said earlier, Ros, the experience you really get is in the room with a client. And truth be told, integrity is really important in our role. And integrity should be the vein that runs through the blood of all education. Acceptance and being non-judgmental ought to run through the vein of all academic approaches, because the level of diversity in our world, in academics, I'm conscious that there are topics that we could go into that would turn into days and days worth of stuff. But I am going to say, I do think there's a lot of discrimination in this country in relation to disability and in relation to race and cultural dynamics. Now, I'm not going to go into that, but I believe that that's totally true in this country. And it does need to change, because this is such a diverse culture in the UK that we need the diversity of professionals being in the world of psychotherapy and counselling. I can remember I'm talking the late 1990s, there was one Black student in my class, and there was a really huge stereotypical view of each person in there being middle-class white women that approached counselling like a hobby. And that was actually my first real recognition of classism in relation to psychotherapy and counselling, while sitting in a student not coming from a middle-class background, being an immigrant to the UK, as in Irish background, so not born here, but also recognising that I also had a disability. And the judgments, it frightened me. It frightened me for clients, because there was such a lack of diversity. And I know it's changing, and I know it's growing, and I know it's developing, but myself personally, I think it needs to change massively and quicker, much quicker.
Yeah.
But Ros, when it comes to cultural diversity in yourself, did you experience anything other than the disability and the way that you were received that was culturally difficult for you within your studying?
Very good question. I guess I did. There were several situations. So I'm also second generation refugee. So people would look and see a white middle-aged woman, not necessarily knowing about my hearing, and I would hear things that would put me in that stereotypical bracket. So my nature is to keep quiet until I have the opportunity to discuss things. So I did. And by the same token, I was there were 12 of us in my final 2 years. We were actually quite diverse, much to the shock of the examination body who came to sort of check on us, rather than shock, interest, as to how we all got along. And I had an education myself into unconscious bias, I guess you call it, towards a black gentleman in my class, and we had a very deep chat about it. I didn't realize it was there, and to admit to that actually was something I found for myself something quite profound in me, because I didn't realize it was there. So I think this is what it's all about, knowing yourself within the environments. And I also saw on several occasions lecturers having trouble talking about difference diversity on a deeper level. And I think rather than being shocked, although we need to keep shocked in order to keep on top of things, I suppose, I found that upsetting. I found that a little bit upsetting. I think something maybe I might see from a different viewpoint to something you just said is that, yes, things are changing a little bit, but as far as it does come down to money, and people from challenging socio-economical backgrounds, economic backgrounds, it's not easy for them to become a counsellor, and they don't. And you're right, we do need a more varied a balance, if you like, of people who are able to help other people from similar cultures. And because we can all say, yes, I understand that because I've got a friend who's X, Y, and Z, so I get it. But you don't unless you've been there. You can try, you can research it, like I try and do in between clients. But I think there's got to be more to service more, as you said. I would agree with that. And I don't think that side of it's changing enough or fast enough, or there is enough finance towards people who might like to be a counsellor. It's extremely expensive. It's had a massive hit on my day job, for which I'm basic and commission based, as well as a basic. So it's been very impactful, especially with the current circumstances in the country, with the crisis that's going on.
And I suppose, we've seen it, Von, over the last sort of 4 years with APA, that there is a very Eurocentric approach to the lessons of therapy and the principles of therapy. But when we look at cultures outside of that, there is an internal mechanism of positive mental health that doesn't meet with the Eurocentric approach. And it's almost as though the establishment, and the NHS has done this recently, that has looked at that and said, we don't have people coming to our Eurocentric service from this culture or this culture or this culture, but they need our help, rather than actually look at what is already functioning within those cultures. And APA's made no bones about the acceptance that there are other cultures that have been around for centuries, millennia in some cases, that actually do positive mental health better than the Eurocentric approach. We have members from globally, we have members culturally diverse, and we have members who use practices that the Eurocentric model would kind of go, no, that's outside of this. You have to do it this way, and those silos. And Ros, when you look at the way in which voluntary support platforms were presented to you as a student, what's your take on that presentation?
I guess I've worked in 3 different agencies. They've all been very different, and that was my choice in order to get maximum amount of learning that I could. One was specifically geared to an ethnic minority. That was interesting, and actually almost at the exclusion of white middle-aged women who speak English. So that didn't work very well. But they were set up in order to service that particular clientele. So that was within their framework for their charity. So yeah, I get that. The other 2, one's a very, very well-known organization, and I think that it's interesting. I have noticed a bit of what I would call good practice in that I work with 2 peers 1 evening a week. One lady can speak Urdu and Gujarati, so then the clients had the option to choose what they wanted, because terminology is also gets I think they call it lost in translation as well sometimes when you work in that kind of environment. So I think from that point of view, I've seen glimpses of good, if you like, servicing those communities, but I've also seen and heard of several of my peers who've not been able to get agency placements during the course of level 4, which has been quite distressing for them. It meant they haven't been able to finish on time because of the crisis, for example, in the Ukraine, where in the area in which I live, or an area near to me, a main town, was looking only for Ukrainian or Russian-speaking therapists, which are few and far between. So it made it very challenging and very difficult. And then sort of therapists like within my group were getting excluded from placements because in the town which I did, this one agency I was talking about would only really accept counsellors that spoke Urdu and Gujarati, or the ones that were Ukrainian. So, you know, it's like a shifting sand depending on what's going on in the world. So that's the way I see it, but obviously maybe not reality for others.
And this is where those silos really kick in, isn't it, Von? That whatever the basis of that isolation is, it's still isolationism.
It is, but I also think ultimately it's about providing choice. And choice is, if you think about the word choice and you think about so many people that sit in front of you as clients, one of the reasons you'd almost guarantee that they're sitting in front of you is because at some point, in some way, they had no choice about what happened to them, no choice about getting help to get out of what was happening to them. And myself personally really do appreciate cultural dynamics, but I will always come back to it's simply about having the choice and the availability, because there's lots of people that I work with that, for example, won't go to their own culture because they have a real lack of faith and trust within their own culture, so want to step out of it. And there's other people that absolutely want to identify with somebody within their own culture. And it comes back to choice.
Yeah.
And it will always come back to choice. So whether or not somebody's black, white, brown, wherever they're from, the availability to have a choice, I think, is ultimately the most important aspect of anybody coming to a therapist, whether or not it's a male, whether or not it's a female. It's the choice. And I think we need to provide choice, because it is up to somebody to feel comfortable with the therapist that's sitting in front of them.
Yeah. And that choice has to be based on the ethical frameworks and all of the protections and the safeguards. But by adopting the Eurocentric approach and expecting those cultural adaptations to go one way is going to ultimately reduce choice, isn't it?
It is. When you look at the different kind of therapy approaches out there, and I'm not going to list them right now because there's so many of them.
We said we're not going to be talking until Wednesday.
Absolutely. So it's really important to acknowledge different people respond to different ways of being, you know, and you're absolutely right. When we look back at history and we look at meditation and we look at where that can come from, and we look at the word mindfulness, I was always a bit provoked by the word mindfulness, because mindfulness was a new label for something that had been done for generations and generations before those generations. And ultimately some bright spark when I know I'll put a Eurocentric label on it and almost present it as if it's something completely new. And it wasn't new at all, you know. So for me, I just think it comes back to what I said earlier. It's about a client having the choice, whether or not they want to go down the art therapy, whether or not they want to go through equine therapy, whether or not they want to go through dog therapy. You know, ultimately, everything is about helping that person in the way that they want to be helped. And whatever works for them is what is right. It's not about us. It's about the client in front of us.
And Ros, I can remember a conversation during the nomination process last year where you said almost exactly the same thing. Ensuring choice is something that the sector can only grow and get stronger from.
Yeah, I don't recall saying that, but it's obviously something that I believe in if I did. It's really interesting. I'd like to pick up on something that I have noticed in peers. You know, not necessarily a bad thing, but something that I would put out there for people who are learning, and maybe even others, is that when you do get somebody sitting in front of you has chosen to come to you and not gone to their own religious community, culture, whatever, because of the reasons that Bunny mentioned or others, whatever, it's down to that counsellor, therapist's responsibility when they have finished with that client, in my opinion, to research that culture, to get some idea of what's going on before they go back the next week. I have encountered, and this actually is something that does irritate me, people who don't research in between sessions. And I think that is a big part of my job. For me, that is something that's really important. And I think that the clients want to know that you can, that you do that. And it's not just the 50 minutes or the hour or whatever it is you're giving them, that you do research. If you look in most of the examination bodies and membership bodies, you know, it's down to the therapist to research that little bit about some cultural thing that takes place that you don't really understand, or to ask in the room. And also going back to something that Bonnie, I think it's Bonnie said earlier, recognizing yourself and when you're wrong, to be comfortable with saying, sorry, I've made a mistake, sorry, I didn't get that, within the room. I think these are two things that for me personally, I like to think I'm quite hot on.
I think taking responsibility and understanding is absolutely right, whether or not, and it's not just about cultures. And I know you're not tying it strictly into that, Ros, because I know you, but it's also about understanding what medication somebody is on and researching the impacts of that. It's about understanding disability and the impacts of disability. As two people that do wear hearing aids, we really do appreciate how that impacts on us. So we can appreciate a client that's sitting in front of us with a hearing difficulty. But when you think about the level of sicknesses, neurodiversity, different aspects of somebody's life that we may not well understand, when we're given a label of what's going on, going off and researching that is really important. You know, when we look at the Jewish history, when we look at the Catholic history, when we look at the C of E history, when we look at Buddhism, when we look at Sikhs, when we look at Hindus, Muslims, every single aspect of that client's life, it is useful if you do not understand to go off and understand, because it might not be relevant to that person, but it might well be very relevant to that person. And I've lived by the golden rule that no matter what I learn to understand, I keep it up here until it appears in the room. Because I think it's really, really important to recognize that we can go off and do research and explore about cultures and different dynamics. The person in front of us might feel very different about those cultural dynamics than what we're even reading. So no matter what, I've always learnt from books, and it's something that I say to every supervisee I have ever worked with, especially trainee supervisees: never, ever, ever assume. If you have a thought in your head, a belief in your head, hold that thought and belief until the client gives you the evidence of their thoughts and their beliefs. Because
Absolutely.
we can always get it right. We can always be 100% wrong.
Mhm.
So assuming, and I do love that word, assuming makes an ass out of you and me, is absolutely right. And it's incredibly important to recognize that no matter how much experience we have, no matter how much, sometimes we can, and I speak for myself, there are times when I can literally predict the next word that might be coming out of a client's mouth based on how I know them, my experience. I hold my thoughts. I wait until they're the ones that say the words rather than myself. And sometimes it feels quite spooky, because when you're that in tune with people, and I will say this overtly, sometimes I feel a little bit witch-like, because I can have the word that they're going to say in my head, and I can totally believe that they're going to say it, but I choose to hold. And it always makes, they don't even know that what they've just said often is exactly what I just thought that they were going to say. So
But
I hold it.
the danger of not holding can be catastrophic. And holding, you know, the phrase, you know, to assume is to make an ass out of you and me. That's if you just think it. But if you act on it, if you act on that assumption, you've proved yourself to be a fool, and you create a break in the relationship with that client, because you've made the assumption, you've acted on that assumption, and they've not given you that information, and that can be deadly in the room.
Yeah, it can. When you say deadly, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that, because within our learning, we do learn about fracture and repair. And, you know, it can be repaired. And very often, like, you know, when someone might have a physical fight when you're young, and then it's all, then your best mates or whatever, you know, if there is a situation and you apologize and you work with the client, then you can come off stronger. And then that congruence and that honesty is there. So yes, I get it can be not great, but I wouldn't necessarily think deadly. But yeah, I get your point.
The only thing I put in there, Ros, is you started that statement with if the counsellor does the work, if the work is done to do that repair after the fracture, if that happens and the client can accept it, if they're big, massive ifs in a world where a lot of clients can be very, very reactive, that makes that if really hard work, simply because we've acted on an assumption. Is is why I say it can be deadly. But
Yeah, I get your point.
I
Yeah.
want to say a massive thank you for your time.
Can I just come in here? Because I just want to say this before we come to an end, because I think what Ross said was absolutely spot on. What you said was also spot on. I think the importance of being able to really understand when a client has been impacted by something that you may have said, that you may have delivered in a clumsy way. You know, there isn't any one of us that is not going to do this at some point with someone at some point along the way. It's going to happen. But it can actually go one of two ways. There's one way where it's completely irreparable and there's nothing you can do. And it's really important to acknowledge, grow, and develop through that situation. There's also the other side of it, that the strength of relationship can become ridiculously closer when you actually make a mistake. You actually take responsibility for that. You acknowledge that, you process that, and you work it through. And where that mistake can end can actually increase the relationship in a way that is so profound that there are words that are difficult to describe the impact of the intimacy of the client and the therapist connection getting so much stronger. And it's having the confidence and it's being able to openly say, you know what, that was a mistake, and I genuinely say sorry. Because too many people are sitting in front of us because nobody owned the mistake of the damage that they did to that individual. Nobody would say sorry to that person for what they did to that individual.
Absolutely.
And I think it's incredibly important. I actually love it, which might sound completely bizarre to most people out there. I love it when somebody goes, I don't agree with you, Ronnie. And I go, prove it to me. Tell me what you disagree with. And when they give me all their reasons, it actually doesn't matter whether or not who's right, who's wrong, who's understood, who's not understood. What matters is the confidence to be able to challenge somebody in a position of power, be accepted by that person in a position of power, and process that dynamic together, because out of it comes somebody that is growing in assertiveness and comfortable enough in the relationship to actually say, I disagree with you. And for me personally, that's why you get me smiling. And every client that ever sits in front of me and says, I don't agree with you, Ronnie, I give them a big smile, because that's massive assertiveness and courage and a massive strength in the relationship, that somebody can even open their mouth based on the power dynamics between therapist and client to say the words, I disagree with what you just said. And for me, that's growth. For me, that reflects strength. For me, that reflects confidence in the relationship. And that's ultimately what the therapeutic process is about, confidence in our relationships with ourselves and others. So I wanted to kind of really wrap that up in that way, because there's nothing to be frightened of when somebody says, I disagree with you. It's about talking it through. And it's about the recognition of their confidence being able to actually say that to you. It's the nuances of that communication rather than the actual topic of disagreement. And when when we have done something that we can sit back and think, oh, I could have said that in a more conducive way. It's okay to admit that.
Yeah.
Isn't that what we want from any dynamic in any relationship? Isn't that our responsibility as adults to say, I'm really sorry, I didn't do what I could have done, I'm taking responsibility, how can I make it better, and can you forgive me for that mistake? Surely that's the whole art of creating healthy relationships, conflict resolution in a really positive way. So there you go. Ros, you are genuinely somebody that has really touched my heart since the moment I met you, mainly because I do appreciate you have dyslexia. I do appreciate your hearing, or lack of. And I can
And the
identify.
ability to laugh at it.
Yes, because that's
What did you say?
Fun.
I do appreciate, I think what I genuinely love about Ros, and I hope that lots of people that see this really appreciate why she won that award from somebody that was incredibly special in my own development. She won it because of her passion for wanting to do right, her ability to accept challenges and talk them through, and to utilize supervision in the way that she does to benefit her own growth, which benefits the client's growth. And when I hear somebody so determined and passionate and still having that righteous fear of the responsibility that's coming, you can't, well, I speak for myself, I can't personally acknowledge her enough for the passion and desire to do right by others, but taking advantage of all the support that she can get along the way to help her be the best of the best for herself and others. And ultimately, that's where my personal admiration for Ros genuinely comes from.
Oh,
So
she's
thank you,
giving me
Ros.
goosebumps. And it's absolutely phenomenal. I'm absolutely delighted that Ros was the winner of the AP Legacy Award. And Ros, you know, we said it at the awards. Massive congratulations. We'll say it again. And it's worth letting people know that the awards are completely open. Ros is not, has not been an APA member. The support that Ros gets is not because she is an APA member. It is because of the person that she is and the way she operates for the benefit of others through her own self-awareness, her own resilience, and her own empowerment. And that is the typical drive that AP put into Siobhan, and it's what Siobhan puts into APA, and it's what APA puts out to the world. And Ros, you typify all of that. So massive congratulations.
Thank you for your very kind words, both of you, and thank you for all of your support and everything that you do and how you support others. And of course, just want to point out to everybody listening that most people go into being a counsellor through their own experiences of having counselling. And I had a superb therapist that helped me through a very tricky period, really tricky. And that actually is initially why I chose to be a therapist. And I think it's really important to recognize that, and for people out there who want to go for therapy, whoever they choose, to recognize that everybody's there for a reason, and it can be quite profound, and it's a very long journey, and counsellors have to work very hard in order to get their qualifications. Thank you, guys.
On a last note, Ros, I would say to you, I can't wait to hear from you tomorrow. I genuinely have, and I may be being unfair with this, but I hold my beliefs quite strongly. I have absolutely no doubt that I'm going to have screams from one part of the country to the other, and a lot of jumping up with excitement and utter relief. Step doing, and I have no doubt you're going to do that. So we've taken this recording the day before you are due to get your results. Let me just finish it off by asking you what you're doing this evening.
I think for once I'm going to say no comment.
I want to say a massive thank you for your time. Von, thank you for taking the time out to join us on this one. I know it was important for you to be here with Ros and I. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope that people watching this will take away some amazing learning that is kind of wrapped up in this. But I also want to say a special mention to some of the academic professionals that are watching this, that are members of APA. What you do in a system that is designed the way it is not a reflection in any of the comments that have been made today against what you do. The system that has been grown over the last decade around education is not the way education has been done previously. Yes, there is room for growth. That is the system. That is the system's place. And while professionals reach out beyond the system and demonstrate amazing ethical education, it is the system that APA is working to support grow. It is the system that is looking for that growth and that wider acceptance of ethical engagement with wider diversities and better responses, and APA is working to support them with that. So for now, if you have gained anything, if you want to get CPD recognition for this conversation, fill out the questionnaire, let us know what you've gained and how that supports what you do. You get that recognition. There is no CPD like confetti just for watching a video. So, Von, Ros, thank you for your time. And for everyone else, see you in another conversation very, very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.